Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Beers with Bill. It is my great pleasure to welcome back Mark, the co-founder of Katalyst Brewing in Bracebridge. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you want to talk to us a little bit about the Mexican lager? This is what I decided I was starting with.
The Mexican lager, depending on, I think you guys have the new labels, it looks like. This is what it used to look like. Pretty easy drinking, sort of international pale lager. The Mexican component of it is kind of a subsect of international pale lager. So basically you have a corn component, usually that rounds out a little bit of sweetness sort of in the flavor. And then you have the bulk of it is Pilsner malt. So you get a little bit of like that malty sort of grainy sweetness as well. This particular Mexican lager is done with the Mexican lager strain from Escarpment Labs in Guelph. So it just helps to accentuate that sort of stuff, as opposed to our standard lager strain that we use at the brewery is Isar, which is also from Escarpment, but it doesn't really give you as much of a sort of sweet finish in the beer. So yeah, I think this is 4%. Number sort of sells pretty well for us all year round. And it's only second to our LCBO beer, which is the Hazy IPA.
So we've been 2 years into the pandemic. It's been slightly more than a year since the last time you and I chatted. How have things changed for you in the last couple of years?
So we went from kind of the 2 people that we were. I think we're up to 5 people on staff now. I'd love to expand our production capacity, although it's prohibitively expensive to get stainless steel these days. So we've actually started brewing some of our beer at another brewery because we just don't have the capacity for it. That's largely like related to the LCBO side of stuff with Passion Project, because the batches we're doing with that are anywhere from 30 to 50 hectoliters. So 3,000 to 5,000 liters, and our largest tank is 1,000 liters. So that's the big one. Still in the same space. More staff. We're probably going to try and add a second LCBO SKU in the fall if they let us. Excuse me. And we're just kind of rolling. Got some events this summer for the first time since we've been open. So that's kind of weird to plan for after 2 years of like having 0 events. And now it's kind of like, okay, like the last beer festival I did was probably 4 years ago. Like between construction and COVID. So we're trying to kind of get back in our groove for that side of stuff, which is moderately interesting, I guess. And I think a lot of the organizers are more or less in the same boat, where they're just kind of like, oh, like how far ahead do we have to plan for this? What permits do we need? Like all that. So it's kind of both sides. So I think the first couple that we do will be a logistical, not nightmare, but could be interesting. Next beer for the LCBO. I would love for it to be the Mexican lager, but the lagers are a tough one because in order to get it to sell, or for the store managers to kind of bring it in, it has to be priced fairly competitively with a lot of the larger lager producers. So it's kind of tough to market a craft lager at a price higher than $2.25 a can, which makes it prohibitively expensive. We tried to put this one in before our Hazy IPA initially, and it was shut down.
How did you find working with the LCBO?
It is what it is. Like, it's a big government-run monopoly. So there's a lot of back and forth, and tell you up front. They'll be like, you know what's going to sell? It's going to be IPA. It's going to be hoppy stuff. And that's true. It happens to be the most expensive stuff to produce, which is fine. If that's what consumers want to drink, I will produce whatever. If it turns around the next day and consumers want to drink super light grisettes, I'll do that too. Like it's but on the LCBO side, they're okay to deal with. There's a lot of bureaucracy, which you might be able to imagine, but overall they were okay. I think it's sort of that 4 to 6 months start to finish, depending on how many revisions and stuff you have to go through, from labels to pricing to rollout and all that fun stuff as well.
So are you across the province or just in the Muskoka region in the LCBOs right now?
We're from Windsor to Ottawa, and I think the furthest north we have is Bracebridge. It's really kind of a function of what each individual manager wants to bring in. So if you're a larger producer, or you already have a bunch of SKUs and there's a kind of a sales data for you, then you could potentially get into the LCBO warehousing system, which is a whole nother beast. But what we do is called direct delivery. So we basically were hand delivering it to LCBOs, or we're going through someone like Small Batch in Vaughan. So send them a skid of beer and they distribute it, because realistically, for me to go from Windsor to Ottawa, it could be 4 cases in Windsor and 4 cases in Ottawa, but it would take me a day and a half to do it. So it's not really worth it. Whereas someone can kind of combine that and make it a little easier on everyone. So yeah, I think we're in 35 or 40 LCBOs right now. Kind of goes up and down week to week, but predominantly that kind of area. I think with what we're doing now, I'd like to be in about 50 would probably be a comfortable area. Any more than that, and we'd start getting into problems in terms of supply.
How has the way you allocate your resources, like your time, your money, and it changed over the last couple of years?
We have a lot more focus on packaged product now. So even many licensees are taking packaged product over draft product now. So, and I kind of expected that as soon as COVID wasn't the 1 or 2 months that everyone expected it to be, because a lot of those bars got kind of stuck with thousands and thousands of dollars of draft product initially. So it's a lot safer. You can still have 15 different brands in a bar across, say, 15 cases or whatever, without having to have 15 kegs. Like a case of beer might cost a bar $65, whereas a keg costs $130 plus. So you can kind of limit your exposure. But yeah, we're doing, I think we're about 80% packaged product right now, whereas like prior to COVID, it was about 50-50. And that hasn't really tapered off at all. So we still do a bit of draft to a couple licensees, and most of the draft is poured in the tap room. But predominantly, it's just kind of stayed, the volume has stayed in the package.
That's good. Do you have a question along the blade of draft? Are there more people sort of buying draft for personal consumption now?
For us, we get a lot of that in the summer. So like people kind of firing up the cottage, they throw a keg in the boathouse or the house in the keg fridge, and that kind of sits there for the summer. We don't do a ton of personal draft in the winter, because summer you also have all the weddings, you have sort of all that stuff. So decent amount of personal draft in the warmer months.
Yep. Now, you've done a few of these interviews, not many. Is there a question that you wish people would ask you that they rarely ask you?
Not really. I mean, I'm a pretty open book. Aside from telling you exactly like financial size stuff, I'll tell you pretty much anything. But yeah, I don't know. I never like leave any of these interviews being like, oh, they really should have asked me, whatever. I I think a lot of the times people don't really understand the logistical side of stuff, which isn't all that interesting. It's just like the reason like some breweries will offer, you'll have thresholds to hit shipping and thresholds to hit whatever. But there's nothing that like is crazy that people sort of don't ask me.
Okay. Thought I'd ask. What artist are you listening to right now when you're brewing?
So when I'm brewing, I listen to a lot of country normally, which take it as you will. When I'm brewing, it's usually like something like Judas Priest, classic Metallica, anything before Saint Anger, sort of that vein. But yeah, generally, if I'm just listening to something, it's usually country.
Jen's curious, you got your own canning line.
Yeah, so for any of like we have 4 5-hect tanks, and then we have 2 10-hect tanks. So when we're doing, if we're emptying the whole cellar, we bring in northern canning, and we'll do that all in the day. And then if we do, like if we're just doing a smaller run, like 5-hect or less, we have our own like 4-head filler and just like a manual sort of hand crank, and then we do that. But that's not really viable if we're doing a boatload of volume. Like it would take me and another person most of the day to empty a 5-hect tank instead of like doing 45-hect or 40-hect rather in I don't know, 6 hours.
No, I hear you on that. Northern canning's much faster than using a 4-head system.
Yeah, like, well, their thing is it's just a quick throughput, right? So there is an economies of scale, and if you're paying a couple people's labor as well to help you out, then there is a certain point where it balances out.
Yeah. No, you and I chatted when I was there picking up beer the other day. You mentioned that you have a really low O2 content in your own personal canning line.
Yep.
How do you achieve that?
Luck. Luck, like a lot of time we send stuff out to get it tested. Like I don't have a DO meter. They're about $30,000.
Yeah.
If you had like Northern Canning or any of those mobile canners, they always have one, but they're pretty expensive if you bring one in on your own. So usually it's a combination of as like depending how much you know about canning lines. So either depending on the line, you're bringing a can up to the fill head, or the fill head is lowering down into it. And most of those, you can program the length of like a carbon dioxide burst into that. And if you increase the length of that burst, then you decrease your likelihood of O2 absorption, and then how quickly you get the seam, which is the top part of the can, how quickly you get that on top, and it's not exposed to the atmosphere. So all that kind of couples into it, and if you can do that fairly consistently, then you'll get relatively low dissolved oxygen or total packaged oxygen in the end product.
Yeah. Resilience, because that's the one I want to try next, which is the Vienna lager.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is our Ukrainian beer. So Crystal, who's my wife, who also owns the brewery, is Ukrainian, and with obvious events that are happening, being kind of a mess, we decided to do a fundraising beer. So, I mean, the label's pretty obvious for that one. But yeah, it's a Vienna lager, and with a Vienna lager, normally you're doing a portion of Vienna malt or 100% Vienna malt, and that gives it that kind of amber color, and then the rest is Pilsner. With this one, we actually did a 100% Pilsner malt and then we did a really, really extended boil, and that kind of caramelizes everything. It'll give you a little bit more depth in the flavor, as opposed to if you're just using the malt to tint. Then you'll still end up with the same color, but you'll get a little less of like the fruitiness out of it. And that's kind of, that's what we're going for with this one.
Vienna lagers were sort of my go-to when I first started drinking beer, because I love that malt forward flavor.
Yeah, it's like there's not a ton of bitterness, but it's still complex enough that you're not kind of bored when you're drinking it.
Yeah. So Derek's curious about the logistics around shipping across the province. He's noticed that a lot of places have a flat $15 fee. He's curious if it's a lost leader or...
A lot of the time, yeah. So if you're shipping, like shipping's gone up and up. So your average kind of shipping price for shipping like a 2-4 is probably about $30. So if you're buying a 2-4, that 2-4 is probably anywhere from $90 to $110, and it strips a lot of margin out of it, which is why there's still a lot of breweries that are, particularly in more populated areas, still offering like weekly deliveries or whatever. So it's a little easier when you're like, if you're in the GTA and you've got 7 million people within an hour drive, then it's certainly a little more logistically reasonable to put a couple orders together and make it worth more than $25 a box. And yeah, Canada Post is getting really expensive too. And there's also like, we send out stuff all the time where someone will email me and be like, oh, I never got it. I'm like, well, Canada Post says it was delivered. They're like, yeah, it's definitely not. And you go back to Canada Post and they're like, sorry. So then the onus is on me, because it looks terrible if they don't get something from us. So then you have to ship a second order, and it's not the customer's fault. So then you've made $0 to -$. On that order, which sucks, but that's just kind of the reality of shipping. It happens with Canada Post. It happens if you use private couriers. Most couriers are a little bit better.
Yeah.
They're also quicker.
I know. That's, you're right. It's the nature of the beast we're in right now.
Biggest one I've done yet, because I often do these orders for Beers with Bill, is we had an order from Two Crows in Halifax.
Yeah.
I got 5 cases of it shipped to my house. They charged me $70, and surely it had to cost more than $70 to get those.
Oh, like that's a great rate for you.
Oh yeah. I mean, how can they make money, and what do they have to gain from sending their beer to Ontario, really? Because it's all.
Yeah, that's like there's no way someone made money in that order.
Yeah. Anyway.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce my co-host tonight, Derek. You can take it from here now, Derek.
All I know is shipping, how to order.
Yeah, I know. And you got a deal on that one from Two Crows, that's for sure. So Mark, what's maybe the most difficult thing you're facing right now with the brewery, with everything that's reopening?
Time. Like I probably work somewhere between 70 and 80 hours a week on average, and it's just kind of being able to hire people that are qualified enough, or they're sort of sufficient enough that it doesn't increase the workload of everyone else. So like we're hiring events positions and stuff like that now for the summer, which are summer positions, but so we have to onboard everyone there, train them, make sure it works for them. Labor has kind of been the biggest issue for the past little while. And again, it's a cottage industry up here. So there's a good combination of people who are young, they're in university, they're looking for a summer job, and that's fine. But a lot of the time, that ends up being someone that's not really, doesn't eschew the brand as much as you would like them to. And that's kind of the challenge too. You need someone that's enthusiastic and represents the brand, in a way that kind of upholds all the brand values. Like, you don't want a customer going to a beer festival and seeing your beer rep at that festival just being shit-faced. So that sort of stuff. And Crystal and I have seen it happen at beer festivals before, and it's not a good look.
No, that would probably have bad connotations to it. Could ask Terry's question. What beer have you tried that when you tried it, it made you say, damn, I wish I'd made that beer?
Most recent one would be, I got into a bit of trouble with it because I keep having it kind of late at night before I go to bed. Lone Wine from Sawdust. So it's like basically they beefed up the recipe for Lone Pine, which is already 6.5% or whatever, and barrel aged it. So I think it came out at 11.2 or 11.5%, and drank really smooth, really, really nice end product. So I play hockey in Gravenhurst, like a 2-minute drive from the brewery. And I'd grab a couple, bring them home. And yeah, you end up with like this nightcap that really, like, it goes down smooth. And then you wake up the next morning, you're like, I had one beer. Why do I feel so shitty? And it's like, yeah, cool. I guess I'll go brew now. Like, but really, really, like, really well executed beer. Yeah, it's 90% of the time if I'm going to other breweries, they're usually ones around here. I'm at Canvas a lot. I'm at Sawdust a lot. We brew a bunch of our beer at Canvas, and Sawdust I'm in Gravenhurst a couple times a week, and it's right by hockey. So kind of between those two, really.
I hear you on that. Mike's curious. Do you have volunteers that would come in and help you can things and label things, or is that sort of a far and few between right now where you are?
It's tough from a liability perspective. So, well, also, like, there's a lot more people that say they want to help out and like work for free than people that actually want to be covered in beer for 9 to 10 hours and work for free. So, like, a couple of people that we have on staff started as kind of coming out and being like, hey, like, do you have any work? And we just started paying them, and they kind of became staff. So like, well, if they want to work when they don't think they're getting paid, which they always have, then they'd probably be great. Like Jody, who does all our sales for LCBO and licensee now. That's how she started. Amy, who's our tap room manager, she actually just reached out on Instagram when we were building out the brewery and was like, yeah, I love painting. And she painted the ceiling of the tap room. And 3 years later, now she works here. So, yeah, volunteer. We're always kind of hesitant to actually take it unless it's like if a family member wants to help out or something like that. It's a little bit different, but just someone off the street, it's a bit of a liability nightmare if something does happen.
Now, you started with basically 4 blank walls.
Yeah.
And pretty well had to do everything.
Yeah.
To get that. So how do you feel now after a few years that under your belt?
I feel like it hasn't stopped.
Totally true.
Like, you get all the initial stuff, like, okay, your electrical's done, your plumbing's done, you passed your inspections, all that, and then you'll be in the space for a period of time and you're like, well, this doesn't really work all that well, or this hose hookup that I thought was going to be great here has to get moved 40 feet away, and this electrical outlet actually doesn't work here, so I've got to trace it back through this bulkhead and redo that. And like, so yeah, it kind of never ends. Like, I thought that when we were done building out, I would take my toolbox and like the welder and all the air tools, and those would all go home. They're still at the brewery like 2.5 years later. So every time I try and take something out in terms of something like that, something breaks and I have to bring it back.
I'm going to say I'm well aware that your tools are there, because when I was there on Friday, I walked through your tool room.
Yeah. So yeah, like the whole toolbox, the welding kit, all that, all the ratchets, all the plumbing stuff, the soldering stuff is all back there, and all of it gets used extremely regularly. As despite what people seem to think, or a lot of people seem to think about production facilities, is the more you spend on it doesn't decrease the amount it breaks, which I wish I kind of knew. I'm not sure there's anything I could have done differently, but that seems to just be how it is.
What's next for Katalyst?
Oh, great question. I'd like to get a couple more tanks in. I'd like to get a few lagering tanks in. Like we do predominantly lagers. So I think right now we have one, like we have the hazy IPA, and that's our only non-lager strain. So the lagering tanks we're trying to get in, we're trying to get a reasonable quote on between the price of metal, which is almost doubled for stainless, and the price of shipping. Like I'm trying to get a quote that's not going to cost me 3 times what the tanks are worth to get them here, which I don't think is going to be possible at this stage in time, but we'd like to get in a couple double-sized lagering tanks, so like 20 to 30 heck lagering tanks, and that will enable us to throughput more in terms of like our cold fermented stuff. So you'd ferment primary in your standard cylinder conical tanks, transfer them to the lagering tanks, you lager them there for a while, and then you package from those tanks, and the horizontal geometry of them enables the yeast to fall out of solution quicker. So you get the same sort of lagering characteristics in a shorter period of time. That's my main big thing, but we'll see how long it takes to actually get tanks in. I'm not optimistic.
Did say that's a challenge right now. You're right, with the cost of stainless and the cost of transportation right now. Just,
it's wild.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Sure it is. You want to do the dark lager or the Doppelbock next?
I would do Doppelbock.
Okay.
It's another one that I always seem to have at the end of my evenings. So it's an 8%, 8% Doppelbock. It's a really strong, you'll get like a little bit of fruitiness on the nose, nice big caramel hit, finishes smooth. You don't really get too much alcohol warming on it, which was the goal. And just generally a really, really nice finish to it. So this is probably, I usually do 2 of these a year. I do kind of a winter, like strong German, and then I'll do Maibach as well. So Maibach's usually a little lighter in color. The Maibach's usually 7%. This one is usually kind of our winter offering, and that's like a little bit stronger, like the 1% stronger. And it's a little more heavy on the Munich malts instead of our Maibach is a little lighter on the Munich. So you'll get a little more like the dark fruit out of the Doppelbock that you're drinking.
Cheers. Mike's curious, is there a sweet spot or a balance between buying local and paying more upfront for steel, or buying overseas and paying more in transportation?
Good question. There's there's not that much difference right now. So like if you're buying a fermenter that is $20,000, like a 20 hack lagering tank, they're slightly less than that, but that's a round number. Then that has to go into a 40-foot C can, and that 40-foot C can to ship it over here is $17,000. So
Wow.
So your options are, do you double your order and you fill up the C can, in which case you're still paying $8,000 to ship each individual $20,000 vessel. So you're adding a third of the cost to it. Whereas if you're here to ship it, you're a couple $1,000 just in freight from your main manufacturers, Creveller, Specific Mechanical, NSI, or whatever it's called now since the bankruptcy, DME, NSI, whichever it is. So, but those you're paying it's still quite a bit more to buy it domestically. So you'd get to the point where it's about, like for those two fermenters plus shipping, you're right around that sort of $45,000 to buy it domestically. So what most breweries do is, if you're buying, we'll call it smart side of production, which is like mash tun, brew house, panels, all the production side, then you typically buy it domestically, or at least a lot of the major components. And then if you're buying the dumb side, which is all your cold side, just your storage vessels, you buy those internationally. Like for our system, our mash tun, boil kettle, the empty vessels are all Chinese. And then our burner is from Mississauga. Our panel, all of our panels are from Craft Automation, which is a company in Michigan, which is kind of the only straight offering for like standalone panels that you can buy specifically for beverage production that wouldn't come with an existing system. And you just kind of give them the specs of your system. They'll come out, they'll look at it, and they'll build a panel for you that's not going to burn down your building. So there's kind of a combination. Like, it's a bit of a give and take. Like our glycol chiller is domestic, just because it's a nightmare to try and figure out some of the specs for stuff when I don't read anything other than English and French. So trying to troubleshoot a glycol chiller, which can destroy all of the beer in your cellar when you don't have a clue what the manual says. And also, like, I've seen some pretty sketchy stuff too. So we, like, our system came with its own electrical panel when we bought it, and we threw it out because it was a fire hazard waiting to happen.
That's interesting that it came that way.
Yeah, not uncommon. Even like all of our pumps we rebuilt and had them ESA certified so that something happens, or just the peace of mind, and also insurance, liability, all that fun stuff.
Are you implying that the landlord would be upset if you burnt the building down?
I don't know, maybe he collects an insurance check and walks away. It's all about what you're insured for.
Insurance company might be upset. Okay.
Oh, they'd definitely be upset.
How do you decide what to brew?
There's a couple things. Sometimes staff suggests stuff. There's what sells, which we have X amount of things that consistently sell well and that licensees and customers consistently ask for. Brew those. Our LCBO beer, passion project, obviously we brew that all the time too, because That's how you pay bills. And then there's a tiny bit of it is what I want to brew, but I've come to realize that what I want to brew is not necessarily what is financially or like viable for customers as well. Like if I want to sit there and brew a 12% stout, that's great. It won't sell as well as like a 4.5% Mexican lager that everyone can drink all summer. Some of the brewing recently has been dictated by social causes as well, as like some of those are specific recipes or specific sort of styles of beer. And then some of it also has to do with the season. Like our whole cellar is temperature regulated, but you can't heat it up. So when I cast out into my tanks, I can cool it down to whatever I want, from 25 Celsius to -2. But it's really hard if you overchill something when it's in 1,000 liters to heat it back up when you don't have a heat source. So like you won't see us producing any Belgian styles in the middle of January when it's -25 up here. Because it's colder and it's impossible to get all of the esters out of that yeast that you really want. Whereas when you're getting into the next couple of weeks, we have a bunch of Belgians lined up because I can actually get them to the temperature that they need to be at.
I hear you on that. That's the first thing that my buddy remarked on. He says, "My God, there's still ice on the water up here." And I go,
"Oh yeah,
you are in the north." It's the near north, but it's still cold up here. He was shocked.
Yeah, like the river, like I live on the river and that's all clear, but it doesn't really freeze up that much because it's always flowing all winter. But the big lakes, you still have a foot of ice on them.
Yeah, that's what got him. It wasn't just that there was ice on it, it was how much ice was on it.
Yeah, still pretty thick. Not thick enough to like drive a truck onto. But there's always like a few people that just drive their trucks onto or leave their fishing hut out and put like a $70,000 truck into a lake.
There's always one. I know.
All right.
Who's your favorite craft beer bar or restaurant in the area?
Allura, which is in Huntsville, has a pretty good selection of beer. In Bracebridge, the Griff has a really good selection of beer. So they're Jed and Kurt own that, which Jed is Sam from Sawdust's brother. So it's a tiny little like super cozy bar. Good food, really good tap list. But yeah, most of the bars up here are more that sort of Coors, Molson. And then you have a few of the smaller ones that are trying a little harder to bring in some good stuff.
Mike's curious about in home brewing, SS Brewtech, Spike, and Anvil are names. Are they even remotely involved in sort of production scale level?
SS Brewtech does a little bit of commercial stuff. I haven't used it. It looks really nice. Anvil isn't, Spike isn't. Like we used to work with them before the brewery. I worked at Toronto Brewing, and we used to work with them fairly extensively. It's good stuff and it's good value for what it is. But yeah, the Spike stuff, or not Spike, the SS Brewtech stuff, their commercial line, basically what they do is it's all produced in China and then they do QA QC in North America. So they're usually kind of the base Chinese price that you would expect if you're just ordering it directly, plus probably about a 20% premium on that. Because you know that all the welds have been gone through, all of like just everything's been checked over, and it's designed a little more. Like if you're going through a Chinese manufacturer, typically you if you tell them to put a hole wherever or a tri-clamp port, they will do exactly what you say, even if it's really stupid. So there's no like engineering flow. There's no like, well, maybe you should put this next to this. You shouldn't like, whereas if you're going through BrewTech, you'll get a little more design because the systems have actually been engineered instead of just built according to what someone like me who has no engineering background has told them.
Do you have a favorite up and coming brewer?
That's a tough one because I don't get out much anymore. In terms of some of the better beers, not necessarily up and coming. Like they've been around like since 2015. Reinhard in Toronto's probably producing some of the most consistent beer on the market. They have been for a long time, and I don't know how much of the brewing Jordan does anymore because he's got a pretty good team behind him now, but super consistent, super convenient because I used to live in the area, but not anymore. And yeah, they're probably kind of a quiet, they're always quiet in the background, but the beer is always on point.
Okay. What's the most challenging beer you made?
We just did our first method traditionnel in December. So basically that beer is a spontaneous beer brewed in the traditional Belgian style. We did a wild inoculation on that in a cool ship. So we brewed it, kind of wheeled it out into the parking lot with our metal cool ship there, which was on the back of the trailer. So we had the guys from Reverence in Cambridge come up, as Matt's a good buddy of mine. And so he loaded up his crappy little Ford Ranger and put 2,500 pounds of liquid in it. And we kind of rolled that out into the parking lot, left it open overnight. It inoculated itself. And then we put that, like we took half of that, pumped it back into one of my fermenters, and then the other half stayed in the truck and he drove it back to Cambridge. Then ours went into a Chardonnay barrel, so second use Chardonnay barrel, and we will be able to package that in September. I believe we have to at least do 8 months in the barrel before we can actually package that. And honestly, I have no clue if that's going to turn out because it's a complete crapshoot. We have no clue what strains are floating around in the air up here. And yeah, I mean, aside from the 15-hour brew day, there's having to age it for a year and change before we can actually even have any idea of what the end product's like. But if it turns out, it's going to be wicked.
I see Matt in a week and a half's time. I'm going to ask him about it.
Yeah, he when he was leaving, he was kind of like, yeah, does the truck look like it's sitting too low? And I'm kind of looking at it like, not my truck, it's probably fine. Probably okay. I don't know, he got back, so it seemed all right.
That's a perfect answer too. It's not my truck. Yeah, it looks okay.
Yeah, we do a lot of that stuff. Like we have a lovely little tradition of every time that he and I brew together, he usually breaks some of my equipment. So I don't think he did anything this time, but like the last time we brewed, he broke my burner. Even back when we were home brewing, he fired a bunch of oak chips through the sump pump in my basement and blew that up. Like almost every time I see the guy, he costs me money.
He's still a good friend though, right?
For now.
For now. The dark lager.
Yeah, Yeah, so the dark lager is it's our first dark lager. And it's basically it's a Pilsner malt base. We added a bunch of Carafa 3 so we could get sort of the chocolatiness without getting the really, really intense roastiness that you can get if you use like a roasted barley or one of the darker malts that's not dehusked. And then there's a little bit of English brown malt in there, which will give you that sort of really nice nuttiness. And you'll get a little bit of, almost get like a tiny little bit of like fruitiness out of it, like very subtle. And just very smooth finishing. Goes really, really well in the winter. I like it in the warmer months too, but I mean, we'll probably phase it out for the warmer months because I don't think it'll sell all that well. As people have this tendency to kind of see something dark and they're like, well, no, that's like a winter beer. It's like, well, I guess I'll stop selling it in the summer then.
Strange how that happens with people, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's probably on the fault of the producer for marketing light beer as the beer for the summer, and I'm sure Corona's sales dip a little bit in the winter, like, or over the past 2 years. It's not a great name for like.
So you mentioned you haven't gotten out much in the last little while, which I
No.
know we've all kind of been, but do you see any trend coming in the craft beer industry?
In terms of beer or style, or there's kind of a few in terms of the beer styles. Like IPA is still king. You see a little bit of stuff with like cold IPAs, which I think is largely song and dance. Or there's a few breweries that have released like a micro IPA, which I believe is anything under 3.5%. Left Field, I think, is the only one whose micro IPA is stuck around for any period of time. I think that online sales are here to stay, and that home delivery is here to stay, and that's one of the kind of trends that we're seeing. And the big thing, though, is the private bottle shop. Like, there's quite a few that have popped up, some that are really poorly done and some that are done really well. Like in Barrie, there's the Wheeled Brew, which is really well put together. They just moved into a new space. There's a place called Noble Hop in Midland, which is like a sort of Italian sandwich and bottle shop, and that is probably the only bottle shop that I know of that has all of their beer in fridges. So basically he bought 10 like double fridges, put them all into the wall, and everything's refrigerated, which is beautiful when you deliver there. So you know that you're not gonna like have a shelf turd in a month, which is always kind of challenging. So those are definitely here to stay. I think you'll find the ones that are like, it's like a restaurant and they're just like, oh shit, let's bring in a bunch of beer, put it on the shelf, and just leave it there for 2 years. I think those are going to kind of fall out of favor, or not fall out of favor. I think they'll just, producers will stop supplying them because you see something that just ages and ages and ages and they don't really move any beer, and it's all warm, and it's kind of like, it ends up looking bad on the producer more than the seller. So I think you'll see breweries kind of pull out of that sort of stuff.
Well, it's in their best interest not to be involved in that stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And we've done it with a couple places where we're like, guys, like, you can't sell this anymore. Like, I'll refund you, but you can't sell this. Like, this is like, either we can get you something different or whatever, but like this, you can't sell beer that's this old. Like, we didn't even know you still had this. And it happens with all sorts of licensees. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot. But when we see it, we're kind of like, oh, shit. Then you get on the phone and you're like, please stop.
The beer store used to be bad for that too. They would put stuff in the back of the warehouse and forget about it.
Yeah.
So,
Happens
yeah,
occasionally at the LCBO too, but not quite as often.
gonna say, well, they've both gotten better
Yeah, for sure.
at rotating inventory, that's for sure. Derek's curious if you've ever had any interaction with Mark at Sidewalk in KW.
I've talked to him a little bit. We haven't ever brought anything in there. Like we've kind of chatted here and there, but haven't gotten to the point of bringing anything in yet.
Because he's pretty diligent about everything going in a fridge.
Yeah, they've got a pretty good following too, and they've got a great selection as well. Like Crystal's from Kitchener, so we've kind of been by a few times as well when we're visiting her family. And yeah, they're like places like that. I think will be just fine.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the ones that get destroyed in a shakeout of like good bottle shops versus crappy bottle shops. But yeah, there's a few kind of rough ones.
Well, there's always going to be that person that goes, I want a bottle shop.
For sure.
Actually understand what it means to have a bottle shop.
Fridges, all fridges, fridges and selection and rotation. Every SKU you add is a lot.
Oh, look at that. Got a Temiskaming bottle shop.
Saw that. Yeah, and I think it's a good thing, and having a place where you can sell beer to, like on my end as a producer, that's not the LCBO. Like the LCBO is great that you go through this entry process and then you're like, oh, cool, I can sell to 752 stores. Given your beer is never going to move in all those stores because some of them are in the middle of nowhere. Like, but yeah, it gives the consumers a good alternative, and also you don't have to go through any legwork in terms of like the LCBO process to get into a private bottle shop. So if I have a limited release that I'm producing, I don't know, 100 cases of, like, I can sit there and be like, okay, well, here you go. It's very simple. I don't have to plan out what I'm doing 6 months ahead, produce that beer for testing 6 months ahead, and then do it again when I'm trying to sell it to someone. So it gives you a lot more sort of viability in terms of being all over the place.
Would you share with us a funny beer story? Something that happened when you were brewing, or?
I have had, so my system notoriously breaks or malfunctions when I'm in the middle of brewing. And it's not the Chinese components that ever are the ones that malfunction, because those are the dumb components. Like they're just steel.
Yeah.
So when I was brewing, I believe it's not out yet, but we have like a maple porter that's coming out. And while I was brewing that, I had the mash tun full, start Vorloffing, get ready to mash out, fill up the kettle, turn on the burner. It's a natural gas burner. And basically what happened was the burner, it fired for 10, 15 seconds and then just kind of blew itself out. And that's enough time to get the burner hot enough that you can't touch it. It shoots out a 4.5 foot natural gas flame. So we're already into the beer. The ingredients are already spent. Maple's already in the beer. And it's either you pour it down the drain, because by the time that burner cools and you get someone in to fix it, you're pooched, or you drain your hot liquor tank, fill it up with beer, and boil your beer in the hot liquor tank overnight, which is what we did. and it turned out pretty well. It caramelized the beer a little more. It ended up being probably a 10 or 12 hour boil. At that point, I just kind of set the hot liquor tank to boil and came back the next morning because I was kind of fed up with it at that point, and turned out pretty well. There's we just chilled it after that and ran it into the fermenter and ended up being pretty good because we got a maple festival that we're doing at the end of the month that had to be ready for, and didn't really have a choice of not producing it.
And what did you have to do to fix the burner?
I came in the next morning and it turned on just fine.
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
the poltergeist in the building.
Yep. Yeah. So I came in the next morning and I was like, okay, this is boiled, great. Turned it on, it fired up no problem for my cleaning water. And yeah, then the result of that is like it's a nightmare to put sugar into a hot liquor tank because the electrical elements aren't designed to heat water with sugar in it, and it becomes a caramelized mess. So that's like a day of cleaning right there. You just crawl in and kind of scrub it with your hands.
I gotta say that's what just went in my head. It's like, oh my God, you would have had to crawl into the tank to clean that all out because it would have all been on the bottom and around
Yep.
the elements.
Wasn't good, but saved the batch of beer.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Oh. Mark, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and life to share your story with us. We all greatly appreciate it.
Not a problem.
And next week, everybody, Adam is Wilson's joining us. He's moved on from being a beer rep to now working on the commercial side of the malt industry. So we're going to get a good perspective, not of the craft malt industry, but of the mass malt industry.